Capitol last March. And now I guess I'll introduce the other two panels.
Peace, everybody. My name is Eric Yorkman, for gender pronouns or she or he. I graduated from SUNY New Paltz in 2011 with a double major in Black Studies and Sociology. I've been the SUNY regional organizer for NYSER since we had the position. So I basically try to stay in touch with all the SUNY schools that we have a chapter at. If they've got a question about their organizing, they can come to me, and I also help connect all the dots. So I'm going to talk today a little bit about how New York Students Rising formed in the first place and the ideas behind it. The first time that we all met up, we actually weren't a group yet. I went in 2010 to Albany because there was, our school found out about all the horrible budget cuts that were going on, both the SUNY and the CUNY from the state. And it was the fourth year budget cuts that had happened, and students were fed up. So students at New Paltz organized, and we took a bus up to Albany. We had a couple conference calls with a few other people throughout the state before, and we knew we wanted to do a direct action. And we also knew enough to know that we didn't know exactly how to do that. So we found some other non-for-profit groups that had experience in doing direct actions, and that said, like, don't worry, like, we'll set it up, we'll let you know when it's your time to come in. And we said, oh, okay, great. So, you know, we all went up to the Capitol, and it got a lot more intense than a lot of us realized it would. We knew that there was going to be other people there when we got there, but we were still very surprised when we saw, like, oh wow, there's almost 500 people here. And if you've ever been in the Albany Capitol building, if you get maybe 10 people yelling in one part, it echoes throughout the whole building. So it was very intimidating. Just, you could walk in the building and hear exactly where we were. So we were, you know, running around, yelling, screaming in front of the Senate and protesting here and there. And we wanted to occupy the building for the night. We didn't really think that we were going to stop the state budget from being passed, but we wanted to just make a strong statement that people care and students are willing to, you know, maybe miss a day of class, you know, start it slow, but that we will be here and, you know, we want to make a presence. So it got further on into the night, and the groups that we had asked to help us make these direct actions didn't have a direct action plan. So we felt a little shorted by that, and there was also a room that the police agreed that we could stay in that was not even in the Capitol building. You had to like walk out and under. It was like a mile away from where we even wanted to be. But at that point it was late. We'd like kind of lost our critical mass of movement, and people agreed. So a lot of us left really miffed, and we were like pretty pissed off about it. And we saw the need to make our own network, to advocate for our own interests, and to do these things ourselves, knowing that we don't have the skills. So one of the steps in that is getting ourselves trained and organized. It wasn't all bad at that first Albany thing because a lot of us came together after it. And there was actually two really interesting moments that everything kind of seemed to come to a head when we were running all around the Capitol building. One of them was when the budget was, we were told it was being brought to the Senate. And I kind of like walked away from the crowd for a little while to check my phone, found myself in a small hallway, and looked up, and maybe like 150 feet in front of me, two people walk out with these push carts, and there's just stacks of paper on it, and it kind of dawns on me, I'm like, those are budgets, and they're just down the hallway, and there's these two guys that don't even see me right there. And of course then they looked up and went back in the room and came out with a lot of police, and they were handcuffed to the thing, so you could not take it away from them. But that was like, it was like this like golden moment of like, we could just, oh, no, it's too late. And there was another one that was very similar to that. We were running back and forth between the Senate and the Assembly, and in front of the Senate, there's the big glass doors, right?
Yes.
So in Albany, there's in front of the Senate, there's just tons and tons of glass doors. You can see through them all. And we had students lined up, pretty much filling the hallway, all chanting different chants, screaming, yelling, and it got, the temperature went up in there, definitely a lot. And it got to the point where somebody just reached out and opened a door. You know, they were chanting, people were talking to the police, and the police weren't really doing anything, and someone just opens the door. And there was like this kind of like take it back of like, oh, it's open. Like, this is the moment, like, who's gonna do it, And a bunch of police rushed in and pulled it shut, but so nothing happened. But when we all left and we were talking about it, a lot of us were really upset that, you know, those moments didn't come and they didn't happen. But the more we thought about it, we said, well, we didn't really have a lot of organizing happening. We didn't really have like too much network. Like, we tried our best, but we're not that experienced with it. But it still almost got to that point. Like, it almost reached the boiling point of like us just spilling out into the Senate and just, I don't really know what we would have done. We probably just would have ran around and go, whoa! But it would have been crazy if we actually did. So out of that, a number of people from Albany were going around getting people's numbers, emails, and contacts and everything. And then that summer, they went and tried to contact everybody they could, invited us all out to a very dilapidated lake house just outside of Albany. It was kind of like, picture a nasty lake house and a bunch of student revolutionaries would spend the weekend in.
And a porta potty.
And a porta potty. And that was kind of it. It was actually a great time. But we all went out there and we realized that we really do have to come together. Like a bunch of fingers walking to the Capitol isn't going to do as much as a fist going into it. So we really realized that there's a lot of things that we had in common, even at these different schools. And as we got into, well, what are the issues at your school? It was like same thing, different day at each school. You know, it's you just replace the specific names, and it's the exact same issues that were going on, really. So we found that there was a real need to make a statewide collective, and we all decided to do New York Students Rising. So that was kind of the foundation of the idea of where it all came from in the event.
So, hey everyone, my name is Alyssa Osorio. My preferred gender pronouns are she, her, or they, them. And I just want to introduce myself before going into the question of like why free tuition, open admissions within CUNY and the history of that, as well as like what it means for New York City. And I started organizing in college. I was a part of the LGBT group on campus, and I wasn't very politicized, but I was a part of a whole bunch of students who got a LGBT safe space on campus, and I really grew tired of the lack of like the ideas of intersectionality, understanding racial justice as well as queer justice. And I like went into the space one day and someone was like, no illegal immigrants are allowed, and that's when I realized like I can't keep organizing like this. Like I have to build something better on campus. So I plugged into this group, Students for Educational Rights, while they were doing two campaigns. One of the campaigns was to keep printing free because they were trying to only let us print 250 pages, and then you have to pay afterwards. And like, if you take any class in any school, you definitely have to print more than that. And fighting against our student activity fee increase, because when you rate, like, if you're against tuition increases, you can't be for student activity fee increases. Like, that doesn't make sense. And we ended up investigating our Office of Student Life and getting $10,000 back into the students without like raising any fees. So, you know, getting involved in those campaigns, seeing those wins, winning a gender-neutral bathroom on campus, working on getting a multicultural gender resource center because we had a Facebook group called CCN, well not we, but like my school, like people in my school had a Facebook group called CCNY Secrets, and men were admitting to raping and molesting women on campus. We didn't even have a rape crisis center. We couldn't deal with these things, and the administrators were just covering it up. So we decided to like launch a campaign. And so, so I plugged into New York Students Rising through the National Student Power Convergence and seeing the need for like a statewide structure of students working on the same campaigns while providing each other with support. So we were fighting for student accessibility and studying in CUNY, and what that meant was free, quality, and emancipatory education for all. And I was a part of the protest in the capital of Albany, where hundreds of students across the states rallied and did a sit-in in front of Governor Cuomo's office. There were no cuts to SUNY and CUNY that year. So I'm also a part of the National Student Power Convergence, where 250 students from the United States with guests from the Mexican and Quebec student unions came together to plan a strong and connected national student movement. to organize, identify with each other, and find common ground. And basically people left the BS at the door. They opened their minds to unlearn and learn things at the same time because, and what I mean by unlearn is that we're bombarded by messages that are sexist, racist, classist, homophobic, transphobic, ableism, and just like plain awful. And people came into that space understanding that we need to come at each other with understanding and respect rather than with these assumptions. And like, why I'm talking about these things is that there's power in youth movement building and power within ourselves as like students. So there's a short period of time when City College was free and open to everyone, which blows my mind when I think of the state of higher education today. And to give it a little background into the history of CUNY, in 1847, a man named Townsend Harris, a wealthy businessman as well as president of the Board of Education, founded the Free Academy. Back then, colleges like Columbia and NYU were not accessible to the working class, and the school opened up its doors to mostly Eastern European immigrants. It wasn't until 1951 that the school admitted women into its undergraduate programs, and around this time, City College was nicknamed the Harvard of the proletariat because of its adherence to a free university model, but it still had really messed up and strict admission guidelines. So it wasn't really doing things for like oppressed identities within New York City. And during the 1930s to the 1950s, City College became a place where radical discussion took place, mostly between like the Trotskyists and the Stalinists. While this radical debate waged on, William Knickerbocker, the chairman of the Romance and Languages Department, was anti-Semitic, and that became a huge problem when he denied honors designation to Jewish students that deserved them. And William Davis, the head of the economics department, maintains a racially segregated dormitory, the Army Hall. So by October 1948, 2,000 students held a fiery meeting and a sit-down to address the removal of Knickerbocker from the faculty and the administrators suspended classes. In April 1949, the Student Council voted to hold a general student strike to demand the trial and removal of both Knickerbocker and Davis. On April 11th, students battled in near riot proportions, some shouting, "Jim Crow must go." 16 students were arrested. 65% of the students stayed away from classes. The aftermath was that Davis was removed, but Knickerbocker stayed until he retired in 1945. And the Board of Education and the Alumni Association found no wrongdoing, which shows that they were still pretty like racist. And this is relevant because the New York Times says like it was the first general strike at a municipal institution of higher learning that sparked many City College students doing movement work for civil rights and other progressive causes at the time. And in 1965, the SEED program was implemented, and it was an affirmative action program for CUNY, but it was still incredibly problematic. The SEED students were non-matriculated, couldn't participate in student government, couldn't participate in clubs, didn't receive credit for their classes, and professors openly mocked these students and voiced displeasure when they were placed in the classroom. The SEED students began organizing and became able to participate in extracurricular activities when they made their own basketball team and regularly beat CUNY varsity. So they were 95% non-white, and they when they were first organizing, the first fight they won was to get a diverse array of psychologists and advisors because the white psychologists had no idea what they were going through. And this is where I like to say the flower of City College and CUNY activism blooms. In 1969, the SEED students, with the help of the Black and Latino community in Harlem, had an open admissions strike. They asked for admissions policy that reflected the racial makeup of New York City public schools. They took over the South Campus, which was this really beautiful building. And if anyone here has been to City College, people say it looks like Hogwarts, and then we have this ugly building in the middle. Why do we have this ugly building? Because they demolished it, and it was designed by an architect who specialized in prisons. Why did they want a guy who specialized in prisons? To make it impossible to occupy and shut down the campus, because we had tons of revolutionary students who were doing great work. And students became calling CCNY Harlem University because that was who the school should serve, the community. Within 5 years of the takeover, the racial dynamics at CCNY completely changed. and City College started graduating more students of color than any other school in the nation. The year City College had a majority Black and Latino freshman class was when CUNY implemented tuition. The excuse was the fiscal crisis. How are you going to tell me that when a college becomes racially integrated, that you implement tuition and it's not racially charged? We were, during the Great Depression, we were free. During the World Wars, we were free. But the city has this fiscal crisis, and since education wasn't prioritized by people at the bargaining table, we, the students, and the people in the community sending their children to these schools, lose everything. And it's during this time, if you're at City College, you take the BX-19 down to Hostos in 1976, and the South Bronx is fighting to keep Hostos College open. The Young Lords and the community were fighting tooth and nail to keep Hostos College accessible to the community, and there was daycare, Puerto Rican Studies Department, and bilingual education. And it reminds me of Medgar Evers right now, who is a historically Black college who is fighting to keep their university open. And, the open admissions part is so key because it can't just be free tuition, it has to be accessible to everyone. So, and open admissions ended in 1999 under Chancellor Goldstein, who was appointed by Mayor Giuliani, and now, looking forward, my class of 2016 looks like a John Mayer concert. We're losing the racial integration that was once at City College. So, yeah.
So I guess drawing from that, what I intend to show is how New York Students Rising comes out of this history of radical CUNY and SUNY organizing. Alyssa gave the background on the organizing that went on historically at the City University of New York, whereas at the State University of New York there was this organization called the Student Association of SUNY or SASU, which began in the 70s in response to very, very similar things that we experience now. Students were angry about the way the chancellor at the time was elected, which was completely void of any meaningful student participation. There was the campus wasn't responding to student activism in a way that was remotely fair or democratic, and things like that, and also and also the Vietnam War. Those were a lot of things that were driving students to form a statewide student network. So in that and similarly to New York Students Rising, it was something that sort of started in Albany. The difference was that a lot of students were coming from student governments, and through that they had membership fees, which allowed them to do things like have office. They had an office in Albany, and had treasurers, vice presidents, and stuff like that, which isn't a structure that New York Students Rising we seek to replicate. But we understand that we're coming out of a history of both really radical student organizing at the City University of New York, and also really radical organizing at the State University, at the State University of New York. So that's sort of what we draw from, and as an organization, two of the things that are really key to sort of our organizing is participatory democracy and intersectionality. Participatory democracy meaning that we're at the decision-making table when the decisions affect us. In both in the organizing we seek to do and in our organizing structure itself. And intersectionality being the idea that oppression happens. Oppression isn't there. Oppression Olympics isn't going to get us anywhere. It's essentially we can't sort of say one is more important than the other, but understand that it happens in a more nuanced way, and we need to be receptive to that if we actually want to unite students. We can't unite students and then tell them, oh, but we don't care about that one aspect of your struggle, because then they'll just leave, and that's how we lose, and we don't want to lose. So that is sort of that's sort of been our focus as an organization, is making sure at our retreats and at our events we make sure that it's in our bylaws that at least half of the of attendants are non-cis white dudes. I'm sorry, non-cisgendered as in cisgendered, what's the best way to explain cis so I don't fuck it up? Like,
okay, so
your gender is what you
we're assigned at birth.
yeah, and you're cool with that. So which we like stress to ensure that like we are as inclusive of an organization that is inclusive of all the struggles as possible. Yeah.
And like before we go into like asking us questions, I just want to stress that like we value like autonomy as well as solidarity. So this like it's really important that the campuses are able to not have like this top-down decision on like what their campaigns are for the semester. Like it has to build from like what is politically relevant on your campus and like what you need to do. So yeah,
Do you want to go into like some of the stuff that's going on campuses?
Yeah, I can definitely talk about, I mean, right now, for the Multicultural Gender Resource Center at City College, we have really faced a lot of pushback because of the way City College is made up. Like we're becoming more gentrified, so it's very hard working with the other student groups and clubs who want me to come to, like, I'll make a petition and some people will be like, hey, like, you're being really mean in this petition. I think you should, like, request nicely that President Lisa gives us this. And me being like, that doesn't work. So, and like wanting to do actions and people are like, you know, why don't we just go into a meeting and like ask? We've asked. We don't like, we're not gonna get anything by like simply like tone policing people and asking. Like we have to do actions, we have to show our power, and we have to organize the students so they know, like, because most students agree that like, students shouldn't be getting raped on campus. It's like making our campaigns visible and getting people connected into them. So, like organizing at City College has been like super rewarding for me, but like also like there's challenges, and like it makes me really upset that we're like losing what made City College great, which was like having this college service people of color. So yeah.
And it's something that's also, like you mentioned, Medgar Evers College. Medgar Evers College is the only historically black college in CUNY, and it's also the only senior college that is funded the same way as a community college. And it's also the only CUNY college that's in danger of losing its accreditation, which means that a degree from Medgar Evers would essentially like be worthless. And the students, the organizing work that's been going on there, I know on the thing it said Evangeline would be speaking, but she wasn't able to make it, but she's been one of the lead organizers at Medgar Evers College. And they essentially organized and got rid and are getting rid of their president, which is, of course, it's like leading to more issues of sort of like who's going to replace it, and it's like, and the CUNY Central has been incredibly undemocratic about it, been trying to just like railroad over the students and faculty interests. But it's sort of, and I guess it sort of ties into why we feel we need a strong statewide student network. I was in a panel, some panel about student debt before this, and one of the a member of Class A, which is sort of like the umbrella, one of the umbrella organizations in Quebec, where last year they had a massive student strike where over 300,000 students were on strike, and they shut down the campuses, and it was actually over tuition hikes, very similar to ones that at CUNY and SUNY we're experiencing now. Under the bill that passed in the year 2011 called New York SUNY 2020, it allowed for further privatization of college campuses at CUNY and SUNY, and also for a $1,500 tuition increase over 5 years, which we're currently in the middle of. And it's sort of, as we explained, what got us realizing, oh, we need to like come together as a state to like fight back against this. And one of the questions that they had asked was, oh, why aren't students rioting? And it's, why aren't students doing stuff when there are attacks on education? How did we get ourselves to this point? And knowing the history of CUNY and SUNY student organizing, it's like, no, we are doing it. But our conditions are different. Like we need a statewide student network so that like we know that there is a group that statewide, we have students who are plugged in, who are radical, who understand the history of the organized, who understand that like the administration isn't there for us, that no, we actually do need to yell at our legislators to get them to do anything, and that and we need an organization that is inherently political, that is really engaged on a lot of campuses. To fight things so that when campuses such as Medgar Evers College are working to get rid of their president, we can like be there to amplify the struggles that they're doing. And the same goes on at the City College of New York and New Paltz and SUNY Albany and University of Buffalo. I studied at Brooklyn College. I recently graduated. And on our campus, I was a part of the Brooklyn College Student Union, where we also organized against. For 13 years we had a we had a community garden that essentially the campus president wanted to pave over in place of a parking lot. And we fought that. It ended up being diminished in size a little bit, but we were able to keep a lot of the garden there, although they did end up making it sort of like students and faculty only. And we've also had actions around getting more printing for students on campus, getting more scholarship for students. Initially, before the $1,500 tuition increase, there was a $115 tuition increase that happened in between the fall and spring semesters, and we organized to get, because we saw actually at the City College of New York that the president there had offered students with a small scholarship to make up for that, and we pressured our administration into getting that there as well, and we were able to do that. So yeah, that's been some more of like just like the landscape of what's going on. There's a lot of students organizing going on statewide, but it's been like work to make sure that like all the work's being amplified and like really connected in a way that can be like really effective.
And one of the big things that happens in both SUNY and CUNY is the issue of administrative transparency. Students are not really treated like we belong in these institutions. You know, it's not so much that we're the customer. It's like you get what you got and that's it. Thanks for the money. So one of the things that New York Students Rising is really big on is having someone at the table, like Viola said. A couple examples about like why that's really important in the SUNY side. The bigger one first. There's so we find out that the big research institutions in SUNY, like Buffalo, Stony Brook, Albany, they don't respond to FOIL requests. You can ask them what they're doing with all these tax dollars, public money, and they will tell you, we're not going to say. And you can even hand them a FOIL request, and they will ignore it, because there is no repercussions for these institutions to ignore a Freedom of Information Act request. So some organizing that has been starting on around the last semester is that people are working on legislation to make these university centers answer a FOIL request. Because apparently you need to make a law to say that you need to answer the law before they actually do it. So that's like the big example, and then a more local example is while I was in New Paltz, after we went to Albany in 2010, we came back and our campus was really fired up. We had like over 1,000 person walkout. We had a whole lot of budgets and forums that had great turnout. And one of the things that happened afterwards is our administration went like, well, we can't ignore these people completely anymore. So they sent us a letter saying like, yes, there are going to be budget cuts this year, and yes, we know your students are concerned, but it's going to be okay. It was like a page-and-a-half email to the students. They sent out the same day a 9-page letter to the faculty, which was very much not everything is going to be okay. They're saying a lot of classes are on the line, a lot of adjuncts are on the line, departments are even on the line. So students did a lot of organizing, a lot of talking to professors. We got the president to hold a budget forum where we went and were able to voice our demands, and he gave us very condescending answers and told us to sit down. But it at least happened, and we were able to say things, and after that they took the option of cutting entire departments off the table. So that was definitely a big win. Like women's studies and black studies in New Paltz were really scared, and they're still just barely hanging on, but we were able to stop them from cutting full departments. Instead, we lost 50% of our adjuncts on a very adjunct-heavy school, but the departments were still there, and that was a big thing. And nobody saw this coming. This is all about transparency, and they're sending literally a page and a half of watered-down information to students, and then 9 pages of the apocalypse might come to the professors, and telling professors don't tell the students about this. They were told they don't share this with students. They got a separate email for a reason. So of course we had a professor that, I actually don't even know who it is, but we knew a professor that gave us the email, and we printed it out and we photocopied it and showed it to everybody. It's just very, very important to make sure that there's someone at the table, and that sometimes that's not even enough. Because at New Paltz right now they had added a whole lot of seats to the Campus Auxiliary Services Board to try to change the food contract. So there's 10 total seats, and the students have 4. And the students always, from all the meetings that I saw, they always vote for, the students are always unanimously for or against something that everybody else is always opposing. And so even though students are on and they have representation, it's not meaningful. They can't do anything with it, even when they all agree all the time. So they're fighting to get more seats. So it's an ongoing process too.
But it's not even the question like students should be at the table. It's a question of like students should control the table.
Absolutely.
So on the question of like SUNY administration not being transparent, it's like obvious that these people aren't here for us. Like there are corporate interests. These people are here for money. They're, like why are we having an institute of hydrofrac or shale research at U Buffalo putting out this junk science to justify poisoning our water through hydrofracking? Like obviously there's a corporate interest there, so it just shows that like appointing these administrators, like the way SUNY operates inherently is terrible. And like, even if we like bargain with them, the fact that we have to make a law to like have them enforce the law, why just be transparent with us, like let us know what's going on. And like they're not, because there's like obviously a vested reason, and they're not facing legal repercussions because there's a vested reason. So yeah, I'm gonna open things up.
I was gonna just
okay.
make one, and I just wanted to sort of touch on what you were saying, because what's happening with public higher education is also the same thing that we're seeing happening now with K through 12 education, which is essentially neoliberal restructuring, where they're going to privatize everything, bring corporations in via the what's happening at K-12, via charter schools, or here via the sort of increasing adjunctification, and what's happening with a lot of standardized testing. What's happening with faculty is that they're losing their ability to have a say over the curriculum, so that anyone can teach the course, watering down the degree, creating 2 tiers of students at CUNY, one who gets the crappy watered down education, and then the students in the scholars program, such as the Macaulay Honors, who get all the resources that you should get at a university, who get their tuition paid. If you don't have a computer, you get a computer. If you do have a computer, you still get a computer. You just get it, yeah. And you get connections to internships, scholarships. You actually know what's going on and are treated like an actual member of the college community. They have their own Macaulay building where you don't get ID'd when you walk in. Whereas on the campuses now, thanks to corporations such as I think it's Knoll Security, which is another private security firm which CUNY has hired. Actually, the same year they passed the tuition hikes, they also They also decided to spend $15 million more in security. So it really does, the work we do, we see the work we're doing reflecting the larger attack on education and just the larger corporatization of our society. Yeah. So I guess questions, comments, and stuff. Do you want me to do the thing where people are coming? Does anyone have any? And if you could all just hi, your name.
Hi, my name is Renata Greidenthal. I'm so thrilled, first of all, to see so much going on. And I wanted to give my bona fides. I graduated from City College. I won't say how long ago.
When it was free?
It was free then. And there was an evening session. I went to the evening session and a day job. So it took me longer, but it was very good education. And I taught at Brooklyn College. I'm retired from Brooklyn College in the history department. So I want to talk to you later about your teaching and stuff, your experiences. So, I feel like really connected. And I'm still, although I'm retired, I'm working with the union, with the Professional Staff Congress that has been fighting pathways, which you just described as watering down the education for, the majority, really, of students that are coming in. But what I wanted to say was, actually I had some questions. I was glad to hear you all moving increasingly, as you spoke, into the political aspects of this, the corporatization, the privatization, and just before this panel, there was another panel in this very room about the ways in which universities are being increasingly structured to feed the military-industrial complex at the expense of liberal arts very often. I mean, the elites are going to keep it because they want to have their people cultured so they can talk to each other, but below that level, they're just going to be feeders into, the business world on a global level. That's what that previous panel was about. So, but I do have some questions. First of all, since the video that you showed had Barbara Bowen speaking, and she's president of the union, Professional Staff Congress, so I'm assuming you have some contact with the union as well, because that's a strong institution, I think, on behalf of students. And I wondered if there was similar connection with the CUNY union. That would be one of my questions. My other question is, are you interested in the graduate students at the Graduate Center? Because my committee, I chair a committee for the union, the International Committee. We generally do some solidarity with academic unions in other countries, mostly in Latin America, but not only. But we've been talking to some of the graduate students, so I wondered if you were interested in connecting or have already connected with them. So that would be my second question. And my third question is about your structure. I understand you don't want a centralized top-down hierarchical structure, but you surely have some form of communication and planning, because Eric was so clear about what happens when you don't plan something, like golden opportunities are missed. So, so I'm wondering a little bit about your structure and how people plug into it.
I can do the first two.
Yeah, I can talk about the militarization of City College because, okay, so I'll talk about, so City College had this really great history of anti-war activism. We kicked ROTC off campus a couple of times, and right now we've just got it implemented. And a lot of the students have been discussing what this manifests into. So we definitely have a really strong Veterans Affairs department. City College is becoming an increasingly militarized institution. We see the Army tabling, and we used to have actions around it, but our anti-war contingent at City College is really kind of became a lot smaller because people didn't focus on leadership development and sustaining these ideas. So the issues with the militarization at City College, we see it manifest in a couple of ways. We see it manifest into Islamophobia because as a lot of us, well, I mean, the FBI has spied on Muslim student clubs in CUNY, even not just within CUNY, but all over the state, and it's the NYPD that's been spying on them, and so it manifests into Islamophobia. It also manifests into a sexist campus culture because there's definitely a rape culture problem within the military, and a disproportionate amount of people in the military have reported being sexually assaulted, sexually harassed, feeling really unsafe. So it also manifests itself into a campus community that is really based on this kind of nationalism around America and patriotism, and when we talk about when I talk about the imperialist struggles in Puerto Rico, my history is basically being erased at City College, and a lot of our histories are being erased because of embracing the national identity of America. So
and on your point about the unions, a lot of the sort of like the first wave of NYSER organizers are actually organizing, or part of the GSEU, which is like the grad student organizing, up in the SUNY system. And at CUNY, I'm actually going to start. I'm actually going to be working with the PSC to hopefully develop a way to have like internships that can allow students to be student organizers and get like a couple of credits for it. If not, figure out a way to get like paid internships, because the problem with like, and it kind of ties into structure. It's like, yeah, we want like students to like be involved and like be a part of the decision making, but people have to work. People have kids. Like the lead organizer at Medgar Evers has like a 4-year-old daughter, so you can't tell her to like, oh yeah, give all of you to this organizing, when like people have real needs to meet. This is why we're struggling, because we have our needs met, because we see that there are like concrete political reasons why our lives are hard, and we're working to solve that. So one of the things I think is really important, and one thing I'm personally really working to do, is making sure we can make student organizing something that you don't let like students at CUNY can actually do. Because students at like, I mean, we want to engage students, but they're like, I gotta work, you know, like we need to be realistic about it, because I think to expect that students are going to organize merely out of like a dedication to the cause is just like martyrdom, and it's like bullshit. Yeah. So do you want me to talk about structure and how that?
I can talk about the SUNY union relationship quickly. I haven't personally been involved in it, but the SUNY side of NYSER has had a good relationship with the UUP. They've funded buses for us, like a number of times. Like when we went to Albany, I believe they helped us go to the National Student Power Convergence as well. We have some folks at Albany that work very closely with UUP as like the large body, and then specifically in New Paltz last year, the students were fighting the food contract and trying to get their voices heard and trying to change it from Sodexo, and then they ended up talking to the food service union and the workers that were on campus. The food workers explained their situation, and they actually ended up joining sides and fighting with this with the food service union. So that was the first time that had happened there. There was a joint action between the students and the unions in 11 or 12 years. So it's different at different areas, but in general, yeah, there are relationships that are being built.
Yeah, something I do want to note though is like sometimes the PSC and like the CUNY interests diverge, like what the faculty wants and what the students do diverge. So like we need to be cognizant of that. And you know, when we wanted open admissions in City College, the faculty voted against it and like didn't really support the students. So you know, like we should have solidarity with like working class people and people within the unions, but understand that like there are times when those things can't happen.
And I guess to the note of like how we're structured, currently there are 4 staff, myself, Eric, and then 2. We function as the regional organizers, and then there were 2 sort of like directors of development who do like bookkeeping. And grant making and fundraising and stuff like that. And then we currently have like different point people on different campuses. It's not the best structure. It's something that we're consistently revising how our structure is, so that it's really receptive to like the work that students are doing. When we started this semester, we had like a whole list of campaigns that we were down to do, and then like over the course of the semester, it's like everyone's just doing work around debt, and people are really just doing work around like the like sexism and homophobia on campuses. Like we need to make sure our organization is like one that is receptive to what people are actually engaged in, because like I said, students aren't getting paid to do this shit. They can just be like, well, I mean, it doesn't reflect my values. If this isn't something I'm really engaged in, like there's nothing keeping me here, but we want to make sure that there is. We want to make sure that like we're building students who feel like their issues, what they care about, is acknowledged, and that is what they can like bring to the organization. So structure's like always like in beta mode essentially. Any other questions?
Well, hey everybody. My name is Luis. So, you know, I you know, like I'm a student too, like out in Queens College, and you know, when it comes to like the you know, campaigns against like the increasing like privatization, you know, of like, you know, school, I mean, I think, you know, that's a very progressive fight, because, you know, in a society that tries to, you know, commodify knowledge, you know, and keep people isolated from it, I think that's disgusting, you know. But the thing is, what like I want to know is, you know, a lot of like student struggles like are geared toward, you know, like the anti-militarization, you know, of campus, to, you know, fighting against, you know, privatization, you know, this kind of thing. But what I want to know is that, you know, like I would like to know like what NYSERD is doing against, for example, I mean, for transforming like the content of like the education, because I mean, you know, like I said, you know, I'm at Queens College, so, you know, I honestly don't want to see people like in my school, like for the most part, like graduate, because some of them are gonna go out to be, you know, like Zionists, you know, and the reason for that is because of the content of the education they're receiving. You know, they're saying that basically their education is telling them that colonialism is okay, you know, that you know, it's okay, occupation and these kinds of things are okay, and you know, same for example like finance. You know, I wouldn't want to see people go like into Wall Street and then, you know, work for the very system that's trying to privatize the education. So yeah, like basically my question is, you know, like how do like we address and like transform like the content of like the education,
So yeah, transforming the content, like we've kind of like, I've always stressed like education for liberation, and like some of the things people have been doing is like building up the ethnic studies department so that they have a larger voice on campus, because that's the first step to like knowing your history, knowing where you come from, and like kind of addressing those things. Like as I was saying before, like, you know, I feel like I'm being erased because of the militarization of CUNY. And I know at SUNY Albany, they've been addressing the issues of like diversifying the education and like saying like, why are the majority of my professors white? Like why am I not being taught by my people? Like why are there like white professors in the Asian Studies department chairing the Asian Studies department, not understanding like, you know, why these things are going on? So I know Albany has launched a campaign saying like we need more of our professors, we need more of our people within our schools, and like also addressing the content of education. University of Buffalo, our organizer, like one of our organizers, Kaden, does this like prison abolition group, not prison reform group, but prison abolition groups. We don't have prisons. Like, so putting research towards that and like getting more people to like understand that, like, you know, what our prison system is, and like doing work around that and understanding like how capitalism and prisons like go together.
You and then you and then you.
Hello, I'm Nick. I went to school at George Washington, which is completely different than you guys, but I commend you guys a lot. I wish that students at GW would be more like you, but I'm part of the Progressive Students Union there. It's hard to get people involved. But I just wanted to like address a few things. One being what kind of relationships the students need to manage or create and establish with, say, other organizations, other groups of people, and specifically when addressing the administration and how they treat, say, its employees. Not even just teachers, but janitors, housekeeping, and people that work in the cafeteria. And I found that like as an incredible tool that like students can use, because I mean, you think they treat us bad, talk to these people. And something that universities have done really well is to kind of break down that relationship. is that to isolate the students from those different sectors of the university, if you will. And yeah, I just kind of wanted to get your opinion on that and kind of what New York, well, yeah, Students Rising is doing to kind of create and establish those relationships. And just like a quick note, like pet peeve of mine, just be really careful when you use that language, like my people, your people. I think that's very interesting language that should be avoided.
Why?
Sorry. I mean, it's just like it creates this mentality that there's a my people and there's your people. It's very confrontational. I mean, I'm Colombian, but like I don't know. Just sorry, but yeah, never mind. Just keep going.
Yeah, that's enough. Yeah. So,
I mean, it's just very like.
Do you want to talk about the Sodexo and how like that was going on with New Pulse?
Yeah. So at New Pulse, the students were organizing against Sodexo when last fall started. Because Sodexo is, for those that don't know, one of the few Type 1 food distributors in New York State, and you have to have a Type 1 food distributor if you're a public institution, and there's very few of them, so it's basically you choose this monopoly or that monopoly. There's not much difference between them. Sodexo has a lot of worker abuse. They don't pay people living wages. They don't have the fresh food that they claim to. They do buy fresh produce and then grind it up with all the other stuff, so it's just like in there. So the students were organizing around, all of these things, saying like these are, really harming people, and we don't see the effects right here. And they got nowhere with that. Nobody listened to that, and they made the call to further the campaign to say like, well, what are people hearing? And in talking to the union and the food service workers, found out that if they changed Sodexo, then all of the seniorities, all of the raises, all the benefits that people had gotten through working there for 15, 20 years